We will now continue our discussion of the Analects of Confucius. Before we go further with the Analects, I would like to say something to everyone. Recently we have been continuously studying Words of My Perfect Teacher. This preliminary guidance text was taught around 2006, or perhaps at some other time. If it was 2006, that would be 20 years ago. I taught it completely through around that time. Since then I haven't taught it again. This time here in this gathering, everyone is reading a portion of it each day, which should work quite well. Now, some of the content may not be entirely clear, but since many of you are already so familiar with the Tibetan version of Words of My Perfect Teacher, that familiarity should make things a bit easier. At the same time, I hope that students in practice centers across various cities will use the second half of this year to study this text on your own or with guidance from someone who trained at the academy. Many of them carry the oral transmission. Either way works well. My hope is that everyone can complete Words of My Perfect Teacher by December 2026. And I'm already seeing signs of this. Many people have recently started studying it, which is very encouraging. This has been ongoing. Sometimes study groups have been formed, and studying together can be quite meaningful. This book also has an ISBN, and in various places we should now study through this kind of method. Whatever happens, we must not let our study lapse. If we set it down because of some circumstance, it is truly a pity. Therefore, we hope that everyone should study the preliminaries earnestly. Many people have received this teaching before, but you may have forgotten it. His Holiness once said that studying it once each year is very beneficial. So I see that people from various places should study it themselves, and if the conditions and circumstances are suitable, help others to study as well. 2 or 3 people can gather together and learn from one another. Time will pass anyway, and everyone understands the importance of the preliminaries. So in class I would like to talk about this with you. Now we will continue our discussion of the Analects. The next passage reads as follows. The Master said, "Wealth and status are what all people desire, yet if they cannot be obtained through proper means, one should not accept them. Poverty and lowliness are what all people abhor, yet if escaping them would require resorting to improper means, one should not do so." This passage mainly expresses Confucius's view on wealth, his perspective on wealth. The meaning is this: generally speaking, all people desire wealth and abundance, those with money. What is called status refers to those with power and influence, those with certain capabilities. These are the things people naturally long for. Basically all people, except perhaps a few great bodhisattvas who are content with little. Almost everyone loves wealth and status. For us ordinary worldly people, in our daily conversations we constantly talk about who has become an official, who has bought a car, who has become rich, who is poor. These are always the topics we discuss, and also what we think about. So for ordinary people, wealth and status are what everyone wishes to obtain. But for a person of virtue, one should not accept wealth and status obtained through improper means. A truly virtuous person will not chase wealth or status through dishonest or unethical means. Such conduct is unacceptable and should not be pursued. We have spoken of this before. A noble person loves wealth, but obtains it through proper means. The source of this saying mainly comes from the thinking expressed here. What it means is this: if one is truly a person of virtue, their love of wealth is legitimate. This is a natural inclination that everyone shares, and there is nothing wrong with it, because wealth itself, in and of itself, is not inherently negative, but whether wealth binds a person or not is the critical point. So while everyone wishes for wealth and status, when it comes to actually obtaining it, a person with the wisdom of a true noble being will accumulate wealth in a way that is well grounded and reasonable. Whether relying on one's own abilities or engaging in business, these are entirely reasonable paths to pursue wealth. It is not the case that in wanting to obtain wealth, one should constantly use various means such as deception and cunning, or improper methods such as seeking fame and gain, or the 5 forms of wrong livelihood to obtain status and property. For a person of virtue, this would indeed be unreasonable. If this is true for noble people in worldly life, then for us ordinary monastics and practitioners, it goes without saying. Indeed, when a person has merit, having wealth is a very good thing. Having status is also beneficial for helping others, and for one's own livelihood in many ways. Status and wealth bring great benefit and are entirely reasonable. But in truly accepting them, one must obtain them through proper means, reasonable means that do not contradict the law of cause and effect. If they are obtained in a thoroughly reasonable way, then there is nothing wrong with this at all. The Vinaya Sutra also states something similar. The Buddha consistently emphasized contentment and few desires, but if something is obtained through one's own merit and one's own diligence, then even living in a tall mansion is permissible. Likewise, wearing especially expensive clothing is also allowed. Even enjoying the finest delicacies and exquisite cuisine, within the Buddha's teachings on cause and effect, even within the most rigorous of precepts, this is still the case. So there is nothing unreasonable about it. This is entirely reasonable and something we can actually live by. Poverty and lowliness are what all people abhor. Generally speaking, poverty and low status, having nothing, being looked down upon, are things almost no one wants. Perhaps a rare bodhisattva might willingly embrace such conditions to benefit others, but for the rest of us, these are genuinely hard to bear. We find them repugnant, and we do anything to get away from them. Yet, if escaping them would require resorting to improper means, one should not do so. In other words, if freeing yourself from poverty or lowliness would require improper means, that is simply not acceptable. A bodhisattva would never escape poverty in such a way. This is simply not how it is done. There's actually a subtle difference in the wording here compared to the earlier passage, but the underlying point is the same. Whether it's wealth gained improperly or poverty escaped improperly, neither is something a person of virtue would accept. Here, however, the meaning is this: naturally, no one wishes for poverty or lowliness. But if you wish to be free of them, to leave behind poverty and lowliness, as long as there is a proper way to remove poverty and remove low status, then this is acceptable. But if it is not done this way, whether through taking bribes or through corruption or through some other improper means of acquiring wealth or status, this would not be acceptable for a person of virtue. It would be better to remain in poverty, even destitute and mistreated by others, looked down upon by all, yet still keep one's body and mind pure. I would rather lose all gain and the means to sustain my life. This is from Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva, isn't it? I would rather lose all gain and even the resources needed to stay alive, and I would rather lose other virtuous qualities. But I will never let this mind decline. I will never allow my compassionate bodhicitta to be diminished. This mainly speaks of compassionate bodhicitta, but in this context here it means I would rather be poor. I would rather be despised by others, but if I were to sustain my own life through improper means, it would be shameful, disgraceful, truly beneath us. That's something a person of integrity would simply never do. In the past, when my hometown went through a time of famine, it seemed that at the time almost everyone had lost all sense of shame. Originally, in our Tibetan areas, eating things like horse meat, dog meat, or human flesh was considered deeply shameful, and people would generally never do such things. But during that era, many people's lives were already in danger, and some people ate dog meat, others ate horse meat, and there were even some who ate human flesh. In our village, there was a person named Chusi. He and his mother at that time said, "Oh, eating dog meat or horse meat is too shameful, we would rather die. We will eat a little wild grass instead, but we are unwilling to eat that meat." At the time, no one understood them, but after several years had passed, people kept discussing it, recognizing that at that time, some people were indeed different. Although eating horse meat or dog meat in the world today, in society today, especially in places like northeastern China, restaurants serving dog meat can be found everywhere, and this is quite common. It may not seem like a big deal anymore. But within traditional culture, especially in order not to lose one's moral bottom line at that time, people were willing to endure hunger and suffering rather than abandon their traditional culture. This too can be seen, in a sense, as a way of upholding one's own values. This is how we could put it. So here it says, and this is truly the case in our world as well. Nowadays, many people, in order to become officials, end up engaging in all sorts of improper conduct, and eventually they themselves begin to fall into decline. Some people, in order to become wealthy, tell lies, producing all kinds of false advertisements and claims. Even though they themselves do not possess these qualities at all, yet they claim to possess this quality or that quality, making excessive and exaggerated claims. What is the purpose of this? Either it is to obtain some money, and once they have money they appear more impressive in front of others. If you rely on your own merit or rely on your own wisdom or rely on various other abilities you possess and rise above your circumstances through these means, then whether everyone admires you or everyone envies you, there is nothing wrong with that. But indeed, there are some people in this era we live in now who feel that if they remain unknown and unrecognized, they don't know how miserable their lives might become. So many people, in striving and working hard, end up in the course of this effort engaging in various improper behaviors. In the end, much of this fraudulent behavior gets exposed by others. This includes what we often see online. Sometimes we come across cases of people who claim to do charity work or care for animals, but it is entirely a performance. In order to film their videos, they then immediately mistreat those very animals afterward. Some people appear on the surface to be filial to their parents and caring for the sick, claiming to have done so for many years. But once they finish filming their video and finish promoting it, in reality they continue to mistreat their own parents just the same, and toward those around them they remain disrespectful. There is so much of this online today. Behind the beautiful images that we see, there are actually many ugly stories that are constantly playing out. There's an old saying that captures this perfectly: better to live in clean poverty than to be trapped in tainted wealth, weighed down by worry. And isn't that true even today? This means one would rather be poor and pure than live a life that is tainted and impure. On the surface, things may seem honorable, having wealth, having status, everyone showing respect, but if you actually look closely into what lies behind it, the source of your wealth, the source of your status, and the source of all your connections, you often find a great deal of filth. Once it is dug up, it becomes truly repugnant. This kind of phenomenon exists in present-day society as well. So Confucius's perspective here is truly excellent. If a person has power, influence, and wealth, it is best obtained through proper means. In that case, when facing others, one can stand tall and upright. No matter what happens, one can hold their head high, walk with dignity, with nothing to be ashamed of. But if the methods you used involved all kinds of crude or unscrupulous conduct, then that is unreasonable. This is also generally true in our world today, for example with politicians who govern in their own particular way. Many countries around the world are the same. On the surface they use many beautiful words: peace, democracy, letting everyone prosper together, so many fine-sounding words. But in reality, whether in the East or the West, there are some despicable people who act solely to protect their own interests and will resort to all manner of means to do so, means that are truly appalling to witness. This kind of phenomenon has been commonplace throughout history. So especially for those of us who practice the Mahayana teachings, our outward actions and inner intentions should be aligned. What we say and what we do should be one and the same. Speaking beautifully on the outside while in reality being completely different is also a rather unfortunate trait. Of course, for an ordinary being to be completely consistent in word and deed, fully aligned with the proper way, is indeed very difficult. We will discuss this further later. It truly is difficult. But at the very least, we ourselves should be mindful of these phenomena that worldly people speak of. Next, let's continue with, if a person of virtue abandons benevolence. We hadn't finished this passage yet, had we? If a person of virtue abandons benevolence, how can they be worthy of that name? A person of virtue does not depart from benevolence even for the duration of a single meal. Even in moments of haste, this remains true. Even in times of difficulty, this remains true. Think about it. If a person of virtue abandons benevolence, what right do they have to that title? All the fame and wealth in the world won't save them. Without goodness at the core, the name means nothing. A person of virtue does not depart from benevolence even for the duration of a single meal. For a person of virtue in terms of time, even for the brief span of eating a meal, departing from benevolence is not permitted. Sometimes we say to ourselves, usually I should be careful, but occasionally, on a Sunday, it's fine to do something a little off the mark. When relaxing at a gathering, it's fine to loosen up a little. A little indulgence never hurt anyone. This kind of attitude is not acceptable. For a person of virtue, from beginning to end, at any moment, in any place, even during the time it takes to eat a meal, and a typical meal takes at most about half an hour. When we usually take a bus, the driver often says along the way, "Back on the bus in half an hour." If it takes longer, I recall Master Cheng Yen once mentioning finishing a meal in 5 minutes when someone had already prepared the food for her. That might be a bit too quick. If you eat too fast without chewing slowly, it's hard to digest, or so it's said. But regardless, during the time it takes to eat a meal, one must not depart from benevolence. So that's the temporal dimension. Even in moments of haste, this remains true. It is not only during the brief time of eating a meal that one must not act against benevolence. Even in moments of haste, this remains true. Means that in the process of doing things, even when we are rushed or hurried, we cannot use that as an excuse during such moments. The same applies here. It is not acceptable to say that because you are too busy, you fail to maintain your moral standards. Saying things like, "I had too much going on today, I was too rushed," and so on, is simply not a valid excuse. And likewise, even in times of difficulty, this remains true. When you are especially destitute, homeless, or wandering in hardship, meaning you have no one to rely on and are completely down on your luck, saying, "In this case, I must do something that goes against benevolence," this too is not permitted. Generally speaking, what Confucius means is that certain actions cannot be done. As a person of virtue, at any time, in any place, and in any situation, these things cannot be done. There are no excuses and no other conditions that justify it. Otherwise, if at some point you let yourself relax and act against benevolence, then over time this will gradually become a habit, and eventually you may end up capable of any wrongdoing. As it says in the Way of the Bodhisattva, even when the wise encounter suffering, their minds remain unshaken, clear and undisturbed. For a person of wisdom, even when experiencing certain hardships, their mind will not become disturbed and remains clear. Our minds should not be thrown into confusion. At all times we should maintain mindfulness and vigilance, guarding our own moral bottom line, that is, holding firmly to our own boundaries. At all times we must maintain a basic level of self-discipline. This is what it means to be a truly wise person. Otherwise, some people might say, at the time, I really had no choice. I was destitute, with nowhere to turn, completely at the end of my rope, so I truly had no other option. And so they crossed lines they should never have crossed. The demands placed on me at the monastery were too high. I needed to build many shrine halls, so I had no choice but to do these things, and many similar excuses like this. But in fact, for a truly wise person, such excuses are not permitted. Those things that should never be done must remain undone at all times, in all circumstances, and in all places. One should firmly guard against the things that absolutely cannot be done. This is similar to what we often hear people today refer to as holding the red line, truly never doing anything that violates one's own conscience. This is something that many of us, including monastics and lay practitioners who will later spread the Dharma and benefit beings, need to understand that having wisdom alone is simply not enough. A person may be very impressive when speaking, but their overall character as a whole, including their morality, their discipline, their kindness, their state of mind, their personal integrity, their capacity. Benevolence comes in many forms, just as is taught in the treatise on the 2 ways of conduct, covering many dimensions, whether they have a sense of conscience, whether they are stable, whether they have mindfulness, and so on. There are many virtuous qualities involved. In our world today, when selecting leaders, for example, people often only look at whether someone is intelligent. Judging a person based on this single quality alone, their so-called wisdom or cleverness, they may indeed speak very well and write quite skillfully too. But if all the rest, their character, their morality, has already become corrupted, then this person, whether they become an official or a Dharma teacher giving discourses, will eventually be seen through by everyone. So this shows that observing others carefully is indeed important, but examining oneself is just as essential, though saying this might make it sound as though I myself possess all these qualities. But regardless, the way we cultivate people today, cultivating them in a well-rounded way, is truly important. It's not enough to simply be able to speak well, memorize, or write well, yet that is exactly what our exams today are based on. But when it comes to moral education, those of us in management roles often consider it sufficient as long as no obvious flaw is seen. In one sense, this is acceptable. But truly, in the context of worldly life, when it comes to actually spreading the Dharma and benefiting beings or accomplishing tasks, a person needs to be well-rounded. This includes their abilities, having the ability to teach the Dharma, having the ability to manage, and having the vision to see the long-term benefit of things, and so on. When all of these qualities are present, such a person becomes a genuine light wherever they go, a true asset to the world. So before reaching this point, many of our young people are still in the process of growing, like a tree being cultivated. If during this stage of growth one is affected by harmful conduct, by negative behaviors, such as stealing, deceiving, or various other such things, and one's own growth ends up being damaged in the middle of this process, it is truly a great pity. So in the course of our studies, we must never, for the sake of some petty gain, end up earning a bad reputation that spreads widely among others, bringing our entire future to an end because of it. This would be entirely unreasonable. Perhaps many young people today, in the course of their studies, focus only on getting good grades in school, and apart from this there is no other standard by which they measure themselves. But as the great masters of the past have taught, as Geshe Potawa and Geshe Dromtonpa have both said, what truly matters is the entirety of a person's character. And this character includes what His Holiness explained in the Heart Essence. The Heart's advice, just as he taught there. A person's character involves many different conditions and qualities. So in this regard, when we reflect on Confucius's teachings here, sometimes it seems that if a person truly holds firm to their own moral bottom line, remaining mindful of it at all times, then in that case this person, almost without exception, will have a future that is truly magnificent and brilliant. This is something we should all reflect on carefully. The Master said, "I have never seen one who truly loves benevolence, nor one who truly despises non-benevolence." Here Confucius says that he has never before encountered a person who truly loves benevolence and morality. This is in fact somewhat of an exaggeration, but Confucius is likely speaking from a rather high standard. He says he has never seen a person whose heart truly delights in benevolence. He has never encountered such a person. Nor has he ever seen a person who truly despises a lack of benevolence, since lacking benevolence is something everyone dislikes. A person without virtuous benevolence among ordinary people. He has never seen someone exceptionally good, nor someone exceptionally bad, truly despising the lack of benevolence in this way. He has never encountered such a person. For one who loves benevolence, nothing can surpass it. As for those who genuinely despise cruelty and wrongdoing, that very aversion is itself a way of practicing benevolence, because they refuse to let anything harmful or unkind enter their own lives. He explains that if a person loves benevolence, truly delighting in it, then benevolence becomes what matters most in their life. Nothing can surpass it. The meaning is much the same here, referring to something above all else. If you truly love benevolence, then in your life, apart from benevolence, nothing else will be placed first. Benevolence is given the highest priority. But many people, when faced with their own personal matters, seem to no longer give benevolence this priority. As for despising non-benevolence, if someone truly despises the lack of benevolence, then this itself is a form of practicing benevolence. While they are practicing benevolence, they will not allow anything lacking in benevolence to touch them. This will simply not happen. But in practice, this ideal is hard to live up to. When their own interests are at stake, many people find themselves loosening their grip on those principles. The brake pads, so to speak, start to slip. If a person truly disliked the lack of benevolence, then at all times and under all conditions, they would completely abandon anything lacking in benevolence. But there are some people who, when it comes to demanding things of others, when speaking to them, set a rather high standard against non-benevolence, insisting that everyone else must be benevolent. But when it comes to themselves, they often fail to practice this same kindness well, especially toward their own relatives, or even themselves. At such times, they often apply a double standard. Is there anyone who for a single day has applied their full strength to benevolence? I have not seen anyone whose strength was insufficient for this. Perhaps such people exist, but I have never seen one. He says that if benevolence were truly something everyone valued, it would actually be entirely achievable. For example, dedicating an entire day's effort solely to benevolence, since we generally have 24 hours in a day. Benevolence here can refer to either compassion or morality. If you truly, genuinely loved benevolence, then throughout those 24 hours, all your energy, everything you have, would be devoted wholeheartedly and sincerely to cultivating benevolence and righteousness. If you truly loved it, then for that entire day you would do nothing else, neither eating nor drinking, fully devoted to cultivating benevolence and righteousness. But I have never seen anyone whose strength was insufficient for this. He says he has never seen this because if you truly did this, everyone would be able to accomplish it. It is not a matter of insufficient strength, but simply that we don't put in the effort. If we truly applied ourselves in this way, then putting in a full day's effort toward benevolence, there is no one who couldn't accomplish it. And yet such a person does not exist. Perhaps such people exist. He means that there may indeed be people whose strength is truly insufficient, but he himself has never seen one. Such people may exist nonetheless. So the meaning here is this: Confucius, in fact, was in one sense quite a straightforward and pragmatic person. In our world today, many people speak verbally of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and so on, talking about traditional culture in this way. But in reality, much of morality had already declined somewhat by that time. The reason for this is that many people did not place particular importance on benevolence. As a result, it can actually be said that even now, many people, how should I put this, if everyone truly put effort into the moral cultivation of benevolence, it would indeed be possible. But generally speaking, those who deeply and genuinely love benevolence are exceedingly rare, and those who truly despise the lack of benevolence are equally rare. What is the reason for this? In everyday life, most ordinary people tend to act out of self-interest. So what Confucius is saying here carries real depth. This reminds me of something very similar in our own practice. We often talk about cultivating bodhicitta, but how many people truly do it? Someone who dedicates a full day with genuine earnestness to practice that actually yields results. Almost impossible to find. Conversely, one could say that among us practitioners, whether through study, contemplation, or meditation, those who are completely and wholeheartedly absorbed, their minds continually focused on this practice. Such practitioners are also quite rare. Every person can become a Yao or a Shun. This was said by Mencius, wasn't it? Every person can become a Yao or a Shun. This means that since Yao and Shun were extraordinary kings of ancient times, remarkable rulers of their era, as long as we hold the same kind of mindset, as long as we hold the same kind of resolve, then in truth, anyone can become like Yao or Shun. We often say that everyone can become a Buddha. It's the same idea. If our level of dedication to practice were especially high, everyone would have the opportunity to benefit sentient beings. If everyone can become a Yao or a Shun, then we too can all accomplish things that genuinely benefit others. In fact, sometimes it's just as Confucius said earlier, it's not that we lack the time, nor that we lack the ability, it's simply that we don't make the effort. Even in our time today, it seems that when it comes to genuinely teaching the public or sharing with the faithful, sharing the Dharma directly and openly by all rights, it should be possible, since nowadays everyone has access to a platform, WeChat, Weibo, social media circles, and various other tools. By making use of these platforms and sharing the Dharma with others, no one would suddenly come and take you away. It's not such a serious matter. But generally speaking, when we look at all the information out there, all this dazzling array of content, the vast majority, perhaps 70 or 80%, is entirely negative, focused entirely on making money, on cosmetics or various beauty treatments. Beyond this, content that truly reflects what Confucius spoke of, matters of benevolence, righteousness, morality, and kind-heartedness, not to mention liberation itself, is far rarer still. So sometimes it appears that there are many people studying Mahayana Buddhism, quite a substantial number, but when it comes to actually using various platforms, because in this era, many people exist either offline or online, and for most people their entire work and life take place either online or offline. This is a truly unique era. In this unique era, there may be various restrictions offline, but what about online? Are there restrictions there too? Yes, there are. But if one relies on wisdom and skillful means, the situation isn't actually that serious. For example, sharing a small teaching every day. Last year, I had originally planned to teach one verse a day from the 400 verses, but due to time constraints and other factors, it didn't work out. But in fact, for one person to keep doing this kind of thing consistently, there's really nothing wrong with that. By all rights, this should be the case. But many of us, including some Buddhists, are extremely cautious, exceedingly cautious. So cautious, in fact, that one almost has to admire it, or at least that's one way to look at it. Whether it's a matter of speaking out, whether you're a Khenpo, a Geshe, a Tulku, or a great venerable master, by all rights, in an age when information flows so freely, People both at home and abroad should be able to receive teachings. If one genuinely has something within, each person could directly use various methods, whether through traditional culture or through storytelling or through various other means, to pass on the wisdom within their own hearts to others. This, in fact, should not be in violation of anything, because this kind of cultural exchange is something that in reality everyone already engages in. But it seems that for reasons unclear, there was a period in the past when those spreading the Dharma and benefiting beings, especially in our Tibetan areas, had many opportunities to travel to different places to teach, to hold Dharma assemblies for Amitabha, or to hold Dharma assemblies for Avalokiteshvara. There were many such opportunities back then. But now these opportunities have grown fewer and fewer. It seems that the general public's correct understanding in this regard is gradually declining. And conversely, when it comes to Buddhism, to the pure land of Amitabha, and to the principles of cause and effect, more and more people are speaking carelessly against them. As the number of such people continues to grow, many people who lack wisdom, who have not engaged in proper study, contemplation and meditation, easily begin to let their own already fragile faith waver and falter quite easily. This kind of phenomenon is becoming increasingly severe today. So what Confucius said here truly reflects the situation of those pursuing goodness today. Confucius seems somewhat disappointed here, feeling that things as a whole have become quite degraded. We often say pursuing goodness is like climbing a mountain, falling into evil is like a collapse. To rise toward goodness is as difficult as climbing a mountain, but to fall into wrongdoing, it happens as easily as a collapse, coming down in an instant. We often say that pulling something upward takes 100 people working hard, but pulling it down takes only the strength of a single person. Explaining this to Tibetan people in Chinese is quite a challenge, because the cultural backgrounds are so different. When expressing it in Chinese, if I'm thinking of a Han Chinese audience, I keep them in mind. But then when it comes to Tibetan people and Tibetan culture, trying to express it in Chinese, I often find myself getting stuck at certain points. The master said people's faults each belong to their own kind. By observing someone's faults, one can come to know their benevolence. This too is a beautifully expressed teaching. Confucius says that people's faults come in many different forms, each of a different kind. People's faults take all sorts of shapes, and by observing a person's faults, we can come to understand their level and their character. This may seem quite simple at first glance. Everyone certainly has many faults, and through observing those faults, we can assess a person's character. But what Confucius is saying here is actually quite insightful. The meaning is this: as human beings, we certainly have all kinds of faults. Some people may have strong anger, others may have strong attachment, and others make various kinds of mistakes. There are quite a few different kinds, and so generally speaking, when we observe a person, on one hand, most of us today, when judging someone, tend to focus on their contributions, their abilities, their wisdom and talent. We choose people based on these criteria. But on the other hand, on the flip side, when we observe people in this way, it's actually often quite difficult to see a person's true positive qualities clearly, because they can put on a performance, they can pretend presenting themselves to others as having wisdom they don't actually possess. Someone who isn't actually steady and reliable can pretend to be so, and at first glance we might think this person is certainly very steady and reliable, but it turns out it was all just for show, merely a surface appearance, something that wasn't genuine at all. When the truth eventually comes out, we realize, oh, so it was him all along. Isn't it true that many companies today during job interviews don't first observe a candidate's strengths, but instead deliberately expose their faults, criticizing and even scolding them, just to see how the person reacts, whether they immediately walk away or start crying or even become angry? If in such situations the person remains tolerant and understanding, many companies will consider this person quite good, and they will hire them, allowing them to stay on. This kind of situation does happen. So Confucius's teaching here is about observing a person's faults, whether they tend to tell lies or often engage in conduct where their words and actions don't match, and all sorts of other matters like this. So in these moments, a person's faults truly belong to that person alone. This isn't something that can be faked or feigned. So through observing someone's faults, we can come to know this person, Generally speaking, at any time, especially in unusual circumstances, if a person commits no faults at all, this shows that this person is truly remarkable. Take the Cultural Revolution, for example. Many great masters were put on the scale, so to speak, their true worth becoming fully visible. Some people at that time remained incredibly resolute, absolutely refusing to abandon the three jewels. But there were others who, even before any meeting had begun, even before anything had actually happened, already started criticizing and turning against their own teachers. Normally, one's teacher and one's Vajra companions are an extremely important object of respect, one to be regarded with the utmost seriousness. But during that period, many people even turned against their own teachers and companions, denouncing them. At such a time, we can fully understand this. If someone would treat even their own teacher this way, then there's nothing more that needs to be said about this person. We immediately understand them. So people's faults come in all sorts of forms, but by relying on this, many of us today, when evaluating a person, can also come to understand their true character and their moral bottom line. This is called reverse inference. Looking at it from another angle, observing faults is actually like a mirror. This applies not only to observing others, but to ourselves as well. What kinds of things have I done that go against morality, against discipline, or against my own conscience? At such times, we too can evaluate ourselves. I have this fault. My anger is quite severe. My jealousy is quite strong. My afflictions are deeply rooted. Or perhaps in various other respects, I am especially fond of sleeping. I tend to be especially this or that, and so on. Through observing our own faults, we can come to understand our own moral character. Looking at it from yet another angle, we can observe a person's shortcomings. Wasn't this also said by people in ancient times? By observing someone's shortcomings, one can come to know their strengths, whether through others or through ourselves. By observing their shortcomings, we can in turn come to recognize their strengths as well. So what Confucius is saying here is that this is something we should be able to recognize. So this method of observation is actually quite distinctive. Whether a person has many faults or few, this in turn reveals their virtues and their conduct. I sometimes think about this. Take His Holiness, for example. Many of us followed him as our teacher for many years, and truly, if we try to think of his faults, nothing comes to mind at all, especially during that particularly difficult era. He protected and upheld the Dharma as though it were his very own life. And toward everyone he met, he treated them with compassion and bodhicitta. So a person's faults are truly something that we may believe others won't notice. Mistakes I've made, flaws in my personality, we might think others won't necessarily know. But in fact, those around us, everyone, will eventually understand completely. So Confucius's perspective, how should I put it, this kind of insight, on the surface may seem like something that frequently occurs in our everyday lives, nothing particularly special. But from another perspective, what he says is indeed accurate. By examining how many faults a person has, we can in turn assess the depth of their virtue. If a person is without fault, this shows that they truly possess virtuous qualities. We should be able to understand a person's level through this kind of observation. Let us continue on to the next passage. The Master said, "If one hears the way in the morning, one may die content that evening." Morning and evening, yes, the meaning here is this. If in the morning one hears the way, hears the truth. The word hearing here also carries the sense of awakening or realizing the truth. If one has already awakened to the truth in the morning or has received this teaching, then even dying that very evening would be acceptable. This is actually quite similar to certain Buddhist teachings as well. What Confucius means by the way here actually refers to the truth of heaven and earth, the truth of benevolence and righteousness, the genuine truth itself. This is similar to how, in Buddhism, we often say, "As long as I have attained the Dharma, I have no regrets, not even in death." Isn't that the very same spirit? From this teaching, we can see that when Confucius weighed life against truth, he chose truth as the most important thing. In our own pursuit, truth is in fact extremely rare and precious. If one truly attains the truth, even if it were attained in the morning, and one were to die that very afternoon, there would still be no regret whatsoever. It would still be worthwhile. In Buddhism, if bodhicitta truly arises in our own mind stream, then there's no regret even in death. Or if we've received empowerments, received the oral transmission, received the Dharma, then death is nothing to fear. Many of us Mahayana Buddhists, in seeking the true Dharma, the truth, would rather give up our own lives, give up our own bodies, and so on. So this is what he's saying here. On one hand, Confucius appeared during a time of great chaos. As he traveled from state to state, he encountered a great many hardships. But in his heart, there was one single bottom line. As long as he didn't go against the truth, if it meant going against the truth, he would rather die than bow his head. This was the very core of his spirit. I once translated the biography of a Dakini, Sarakandra, and looking through her biography, it's clear that as a woman she encountered all kinds of suffering. At times she grew very troubled. There were times after she had finished writing out a Dharma teaching, because her husband at the time, Jetral Rinpoche, often made her angry and mistreated her. In a fit of anger, she burned all her Dharma writings. But there was one bottom line for her that never wavered, her diligence in seeking the Dharma. No matter what happened, at any time, her faith in the three jewels remained immense. It was just like that. As for Confucius's spirit, since this saying is so famous, everyone here probably knows it. If one hears the Dharma in the morning, it's all right even to die that evening. And we sometimes say, and this isn't just about humans, right before death, if one hears the name of a Buddha, then dying is no problem at all. There are some of us who go to slaughterhouses every day, holding a prayer wheel, chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. It might seem a little strange, but in truth, these sentient beings are also quite pitiful. This life of theirs is about to come to an end, and within the boundless, endless ocean of samsara, whether they'll encounter the sound of the three jewels again, whether they'll ever hear the names of the three jewels, is hard to say. So even if it's just by an animal's ear that Om Mani Padme Hum is spoken, or other liberation through hearing mantras are recited, this could be said to be, to die in the evening would be all right. We could put it that way. As for us, many people are just the same. We've truly relied on the blessings of our Guru and the three jewels and heard some wonderful truths. So if we practice accordingly, there will certainly be benefit. But if we don't practice diligently and don't go to listen to the teachings, then according to Confucius's meaning, even if you live to be 100 years old, it wouldn't really mean much. If you have no aspiration for the truth and simply spend your time eating, drinking, and staying in this world, then in truth that amounts to nothing. It's also said in the sutras, if a person lives 100 years but does not understand the Dharma of arising and ceasing, it's not as good as living one day and truly understanding it. This means if you live to be 100 but you never truly came to understand the essential Dharma of life and death, it would be better to have lived only one day and then died. It's as if a life is cut short before it could truly begin. Nothing meaningful was left behind. Vast learning without practice brings no benefit to one's own mind, just as a stone sitting in water for 100 years stays dry at its core. As it's said in the water and wood aphorisms, all the learning in the world without actual practice is like a stone sitting in water, whose nature simply cannot become wet. There's no great meaning in that, but if there's true meaning, even living just one day is worthwhile. Even receiving the Dharma for just one day, the benefit from that is immense. As it said, better to endure boundless suffering than to gain the sound of a Buddha's voice. This is from the Avatamsaka Sutra, I believe. It says it's better to endure boundless suffering as long as you've heard the name of a Buddha. For example, in the Lotus Sutra it says, homage to the Buddha. Better not to experience any pleasure at all than to never hear the Buddha's name. In other words, even if you experience tremendous happiness, if you never hear a Buddha's name, then that kind of life has no real meaning. From the perspective of Mahayana Buddhism, to hear a Buddha's name, to hear the Dharma, this is something of truly great significance. So you see, in our own time, because the Dharma of dependent origination is inconceivable, there are real, true events happening now. Whenever we try to teach the Dharma in any setting, there are often many obstacles. It's never certain. But relying on this kind of dependent origination, many of us have come to receive the Buddhist teachings, to hear a Buddha's name, and have started reading the sutras on our own. And that too is a very good thing. There are some of us who seem overly attached to the tantric teachings. I don't think that's necessary. Many people in big cities say, I've already finished the preliminary practices, but I still haven't received an empowerment. As if only an empowerment counts as the Dharma, and as if nothing else, no other teaching matters at all. This kind of thinking isn't quite reasonable. When the right conditions ripen, one can receive an empowerment. There's no need to force it. In fact, finishing the preliminary practices doesn't mean every teaching has been perfected. Within the sutra tradition, there are so many teachings, and even without receiving an empowerment, there is still so much else to practice. Being overly fixated on receiving an empowerment isn't necessarily right. Honestly, whether you practice tantric teachings or the main practice of the sutra path, they're essentially the same. If you're a genuinely good practitioner, the great masters of the past attained realization simply through meditating on death and impermanence. Some attained realization through meditating on the suffering of samsara. Some through meditating on karma and its results. Many great masters attained realization this way too. But if you don't practice well, even with teachings on primordial purity or with practices on yamantaka, some people have gone severely astray in the Buddhist sense. One might say they ended up creating obstacles so grave they resembled demonic obstruction. All manner of things can happen. So nowadays, among the many people in the cities, even though they haven't received an empowerment, there's really no need to be in such a rush. Some people are constantly running around searching for this teacher or that one. Sometimes one ends up encountering someone who isn't actually a true spiritual teacher. Some people use the pretext of giving empowerments and end up causing all kinds of obstacles for others. This kind of thing has happened before, so for many of us, the goal isn't specifically to seek out tantric teachings. Theravada Buddhism has so many practitioners today, and they don't necessarily seek tantric teachings. Mahayana Sutra tradition has so many practitioners too, and they don't necessarily seek tantric teachings either. So while in Tibetan Buddhism there are certain rare, special individuals who may receive empowerments and who may practice the preliminaries, the purpose of practicing the preliminaries isn't simply to obtain a tantric empowerment and main practice. If you don't actually practice, even receiving 100 empowerments won't be of any use. Even receiving 100 pointing out instructions on primordial purity won't have much meaning either. What truly matters is the practice itself. Nowadays, some people say, I've now finished the preliminary practices. But finishing the preliminary once isn't really anything special. Even Patrul Rinpoche completed them 25 times. We're likely far behind that. So given that, we need to gain much more. So whether it's the words of my perfect teacher, or the teachings on the middle way, or other sutra tradition teachings, I hope everyone will continue to value them. In this way, your practice will truly bear fruit. So here, regarding hearing the way in the morning, in truth we have already received the Dharma. We should all rejoice in this. Through all sorts of means, as long as our faith is strong enough, it's perfectly fine. With sufficient faith, even seeing a dog's tooth as the Buddha's tooth, in the end, true accomplishment can still be attained. There are accounts from the past of animals who heard a Buddha's name spoken directly into their ear, and even those beings are said to have attained liberation. So now, relying on all kinds of causes and conditions, whatever Dharma we have truly received should continue to be deepened again and again. That's all for today.
Kirgana jirano chupan chupun zonen droa droa bandangara badna asadarda bandangara badna asadarda bandangara badna asadarda